So I want to talk about social anxiety and mindfulness. There's been this interesting conflict in my mind for a while now on whether, awakening and sort of consciousness working towards enlightenment, if you will. I've been contemplating on whether, working towards awakening is going to solve sort of the mind's problems. The sort of, like an example, social anxiety. I've always pondered whether if I just continue doing this sort of meditation, mindfulness, awakening, and enlightenment thing, is it going to sort of cure my social anxiety? Or am I going to have to do sort of, just the more general, just psychological therapy kind of thing? It's a bit windy here. I'm going to find a place where it's not so windy. So this has been an interesting thing to think about. But what I've realized is that to try and fix the mind with the mind, or to try and change the mind using the mind, it's not so effective. It's not so effective. It can help because there are so many different parts of your mind. One part of your mind can be more of a helping part of your mind that helps another part of your mind. So yeah, it's been this constant thing, and I've been asking the question, and been asking it on the internet. Well, not personally, but looking up this question and seeing what other people are saying. Will enlightenment free you from, the sort of mind problems that you have, the kind of social anxiety and the general kind of things? And it seems like, I go back and forth. It's like I go back and forth between thinking I'll fuck the mind, I'll just fucking transcend the mind. I'll just work on awakening, work on meditation, cultivating more mindfulness. I'll just do that and things will sort themselves out. Going back and forth between that and, okay, no, let's do some more conventional, what's that word? Anyway, work, or, go to therapy or something. And both ways are good. To do both simultaneously is probably the best thing that you can do. Self-improvement work, upgrading your mind, but at the same time, upgrading your consciousness, your mindfulness. But anyway, it seems to me that when I'm more conscious, when I'm more mindful, meaning when I can see things more clearly, when I'm not perceiving the world so much through my ego, through my mind, it seems to me that these sort of problems that I have, these reoccurring problems like social anxiety, or the recurring patterns in your mind that you go, oh fuck, I need to sort that out. It seems those things start to become a lot lighter and they're not this heavy thing, and it seems like it's it's you know, so when I'm more mindful, which is to say when I see things more clearly as they are, you know, when I'm watching sensations, like when I'm not perceiving reality through, you know, filtered through the mind, when I'm not perceiving it filtered through the mind story and beliefs, when I can step back and observe the mind, be mindful of it, you know, it's not true. You know, the beliefs that you have in your head aren't true. And when you step back and you are just observing the mind, you can see that. And so anyway, I just wanted to share this because because with, like, it's not like you become more mindful and then these problems are gone. It's like they just don't exist anymore. The thing is what happens is you don't identify with them. It's not that they just vanish, it's not that you push them away or they're just gone. Like, these problems in your head are still there, but you're viewing them from a vantage point. You're objectifying them, and you're not attaching your sense of identity to them. You can see this just past conditioning, you know, and it's not who you are. So I think another thing, as well as, you know, this sort of consciousness work, is, well, loving kindness, meditation. When you start, you know, like saying phrases to yourself like, may I be free from suffering, and you generate those feelings within you as strong as you can. You know, what is it like to be free from suffering? And you try and visualize and feel what that would be like, and, you know, remember a time when you felt truly free from suffering. You know, may I be free from suffering, may I be free from ill will, may I be free, you know, may I be truly happy, may I be loved. And you start doing that with other people. And the interesting thing here is that like, as an example, social anxiety is a very selfish thing. It's all about me, self-centeredness. You know, because most of the time in my life, you know, when walking around people, say for an example, you know, there's, like, I'm just so... I'm closed off. I don't want to be around people. I don't want to, you know, I think there's just like this big, like, core belief within me that, like, people are mean, people are critical and judgmental, and they've treated me bad in the past. So I've got, like, this core belief that it's like people are bad. And so I constantly want to, like, stay away from people. And it's to the point where I don't think about it anymore. It's just like a subconscious, automatic belief that happens. And that's a really big core belief, because it triggers a lot. It triggers a lot of other beliefs, like I can't express myself because people will judge me and all this kind of shit. And so that kind of core belief, like people are bad, people are judgmental, triggers me to go into my head and run this story in my mind. And it happens unconsciously. I'm not conscious of it. This is why mindfulness is good, is you can start to cultivate this introspective awareness, that you're aware of these stories that you're making up in your head that you believe to be true. So yeah, it's like this. I get caught up in the story, and it's very hard to break out. It's very hard to realize that you're not your mind. Like, this is at the heart of spiritual awakening. This is what awakening means, is to realize that you're not your mind. That the thoughts in your head, that's not you. And so it's a very rare thing, and people think you're going fucking crazy. But actually, it's the other way around. Like, people are crazy for believing their thoughts, believing that they are their mind. And so it's quite a revelation when you can step back and you can really observe your mind and see that it's not you, and it's just like generating shit on its own, and it's not really based in any sort of truth. So when this mindfulness kicks in, or when you can start to sort of cultivate it more intentionally, you can I'll just give you an example. Like, just when I was like walking past all these cars and shit, and I was very mindful of just sort of all my senses, including my thoughts and feelings and shit. And it's interesting because, like I said before, like, I'll look at people, I'll look at the cars, and it'll just be like, it's just kind of like I avoid that, I shut that out. It's like you don't want to, like, I don't want. It's interesting. It's like there's just this like little hint that like people are evil or something. Just like, oh, there are cars and there are people in those cars, and like people are mean, and like, it's really interesting. It's very subtle. It's just that people are mean. These cars that are going by are mean. And then, so what happens is you start to become aware of that. And then you go, well, that's kind of weird. And so you're aware of like, oh, why do I have like this aversion to people, this aversion to cars, Like, I'm like projecting this like subtle sense of like evilness onto it. Like it's, like they're out to get me, like the world is out to get me. People are out to get me. People are mean. People are judgmental, and they're coming for me. They're gonna fucking criticize me, and I'm gonna get hurt. It's like this subtle projection that I'm putting on to everybody. And so you start to become aware of that, and then you go, well, let me just actually be aware of these cars, or be aware of these people as they are, without me like fabricating some whole fucking mental story onto them. And then you like start to see, well, who are these people? Like, well, there's people in the cars, isn't there? And then you start to think about, like, well, they're people just like me, having their own lives, doing their own things, going places. And then you start to see, well, they're just like me. And people just like me could have, all these anxieties and shit. I think, like, I also project this subtle superiority onto people. And, like, people know more than I do. Like, all these people are grown up, and they know what life is. They know how to, they're adults, and they've got everything figured out. And I'm inferior to that. It's this subtle projection. And that's just part of my conditioning. But yeah, so basically what I'm saying is, you start to see that all these people are just another conscious being, that are just conscious beings just like me. And then when you start generating this love and kindness, and start to say these phrases and generate that feeling, like, well, may I be free from suffering. Yes, that would be fucking great. May I be truly happy. Yes, and you generate those feelings and feel what that's like. And then, you look at the people and the cars, and it's like, there's people in the cars doing their thing. They're just like me, just these innocent beings. And you go, may you be free from suffering. May you be truly happy. And you generate those feelings. It's like, fuck, man, like. And that's where, like, oneness really starts to kick in. It's like, I'm not, like, separate from people. I'm not inferior, or people aren't mean or judgmental. Like, I mean, yeah, they can be, but it's all because they are feeling some anxiety or pain within them. And that's just the same with me. Like, I'm fucking criticizing and judgmental to people sometimes. And that's because I'm fucking hurting and fucking anxious and in pain as well. So it's really about knowing yourself outside of your mind, knowing yourself not with your mind, knowing who you are. It's about knowing who you are, not with thought. And then it's about looking at other people and knowing them as yourself, and knowing yourself as them. And then it's like really weird, because it's like there's nothing to fear. There's no worry. Because constantly, like, I think in this Western society, the majority of our fears come from social things. It's very social centered, our fear. We're surviving socially. I constantly fear, like, and this is the thing, is that it's hard to know what your mind's doing if you haven't developed enough mindfulness. It's a very fucking tricky thing to do. But when you start to become more mindful of your mind, you can start to see all your fears and shit. Because we're constantly running on autopilot. Like, our fears just come into us, and we're not even aware that they are thoughts, or that they're feelings, or they just take us over. They possess us. We're possessed by these thoughts, and we don't even know what's happening. And we just assume that we are these thoughts. But we don't even know they're thoughts. It's just like something happens, and then, we're just acting out of hate or fear or something. It's like, I don't fucking know what's happening, because we're not mindful enough. We're not mindful of the present moment. We're acting from the past. So really what I'm saying, is that, we have a lot of fear centered around social life. And it can be very tricky to recognize it in the present moment when it's happening. Like, oh, I fear that I'm going to get criticized and judged. Oh, I don't like that person. All this stuff. It's very hard to recognize that that's actually happening within our mind, because it's very subconscious and automatic. And so a lot of our fear is based around this, on our moment-to-moment experience. We're living in the past of judgment and criticism. But what I'm saying is that when you can start to become aware that everyone is just like you, just this innocent being looking for love, and you just start to see that in everybody, it's like, fuck, it's one. It's just us. It's just oneness. It's just this human race looking for love. And the only reason we act out of hate or judgment is because we're afraid or in pain. And you can really see the love within people, the innocence and love within other people. And at that moment, there's nothing to fear, because like I said, most of the time it's a social fear. And it fucking contaminates a lot of our life that we don't really even think about. Things oh, I've got to get money, or I've got to get this job, or I've got to get this relationship, or I've got to be seen as this way, I've got to get these new clothes, I've got to do this certain thing in life, I've got to get here, I've got to do this. And the thing is that we don't realize that all these things are coming from sort of fear that we won't be good enough, fear that we're not going to be approved or validated by other people. Because here's the thing, what would you do if you didn't care what other people thought of you? What would you do if you weren't tied down to people's perception of you? Because I know in my own experience that I've got all these desires, I've got to earn money to move out of my house. That, for an example, is very interconnected with this sort of fear of judgment. I'm an adult now, and I've got to move out of my parents' house, and what are people going to think of me? Oh, and I'm not studying or working at a job. What are people going to think of me? And then there's this guilt and shit, and it's oh, what are people going to think of me? Oh no, people are mean and judgmental of me. And so it's all this thing, and it's I'm not saying that don't have any dreams, don't get money and move out of your parents' house. That's something that I want to do, but at the same time, what I'm saying is that it's very fucking interconnected with this fear of judgment from other people. And that really slows down my progress to actually going and getting money in a fucking honest way. And like there's a difference between doing what you want because you love it and doing what you want because you're afraid of what people will think. Like, are you doing, like, in the majority of your life, are you doing things out of love or are you doing it out of fear? A lot of the time we're trying to move away from suffering. We're trying to get away from suffering. So we're doing everything to try and get away from suffering. But what that's doing is we're just avoiding suffering and we're not acting authentically. There's a difference between avoid suffering and going towards what you love. So basically, back to that example of like, say like moving out of my parents' house or whatever, like it's all very interconnected with people's judgment and like, oh, I'm not doing anything with my life that people will think, like at my age, it's like, what are you doing? Are you studying? Are you working? Like, what are you doing? And it's like, well, I don't actually know what I'm doing, but there's a lot of this guilt within me of like, oh shit, like I've got to be doing something. But it's like, we're all unique. We've all got different stories, and this is the thing, is that it stops us from acting authentically. A lot of fear. So what I'm saying is, like, if you have this kind of loving kindness approach and mindfulness, and you start to see that everyone is just the same as you, then there's nothing to fear and you're going to act authentically. And it's easier said than done, like I'm just filming this video now because I just had a good few minutes of mindfulness and loving kindness, and I was like, that's really interesting. And so it seems to me that it's like, yes, if you cultivate mindfulness, you really fucking work on that shit, and loving kindness, that's gonna make your life a whole lot better. But there's a lot of deeply rooted programs within us that are gonna take a hell of a lot of mindfulness to be aware of what's actually going on. And it's sometimes we're more mindful than other times, and but it's a practice. Meditation and loving kindness, it's all a practice. So, but I think like these two things, or just mindfulness in general, is going to be the cure for your suffering. At the same time though, I do believe you can have fucking insights into the nature of who you are and to the nature of reality, and that might fucking, make your reality crumble down, which is going to be scary in the process. But at the same time, it's the natural process that's going to happen for you to be free from suffering. But yeah, also I think in conjunction with that, it is beneficial to work on self-improvement, the psychological side of things, the mind therapy and all that. I think that's also beneficial to work on that simultaneously with mindfulness. But I think at the end of the day, mindfulness is curative in and of itself. So yeah, it's just interesting to me when I can shift that perception. When I'm walking down the street and there are cars going by, and I'm not really fucking aware of who I am or what reality is. I'm caught up in my thoughts. I'm lost in my thoughts, in my story, my mental story, and believing all this shit. And I don't know what's fucking happening until I fucking wake up from that and go, oh, hang on a minute. Here I am walking. Let me be aware of the sensations of my legs moving. Let me me be aware of my facial muscles and every sensation of my body. Let me be aware of the sounds I'm hearing, every little tiny sound. Let me be aware of the visuals, the colours and the shapes and the lights. Let me be aware of, the breeze on my skin, and then when you've seen that, you've got this sort of extrospective awareness, and then you start to see this, and then you start to be more aware introspectively. Then you can see that all this is happening within the space of consciousness, so to speak. Because whereas before you're in your thoughts, you're all fucking tangled up in your thoughts and your beliefs and your story. And then when you start to become mindful of sounds and sights and whatever, and then you start to become aware of the thoughts, you can see that this is all happening in one space. Because before you're in your thoughts and your story, but you're not aware that you're in your thoughts and story. So what I'm saying here is you become mindful, and then you're aware that you're thinking. Before you weren't aware, you were just thinking, and you became the thought, you became this whole story in your mind. But when you step back, use mindfulness, you're aware of the thinking. And so it's just really great to have this perceptual shift where at one moment you're in your head, in your story, and thinking that what you're thinking is true. I've got to do this. I'm fucking unworthy because of that, and all this shit. And then you step back and you become aware of that. And you start to become aware that it's all kind of irrelevant in the moment, because it's why am I thinking about all this shit? It's not happening now. Let me enjoy this moment. Let me enjoy the sights and the sounds and the breeze on my face. Let me enjoy this. The moment is all there ever is. Why am I stuck up in the head about the past and future? That's not relevant to me right now. And you enjoy this moment, and it's and you start to see the cars, and it's wow, man, look at all these fucking cars going by with all these people in them. Wow, they're people. And then another story comes up in your head, oh fuck, they're people, they're judgmental and critical of me, oh no. And then you become aware of that thought, and you go, that's just a thought. And then you put yourself back in the present moment, because that thought's coming from the past, from some past conditioning. Come back in the present moment, and you look at people freshly and go, people, I'm a person, they're people, just like me. Worthy of love, just like me. And you start to see this this love and this oneness, and the fear dissipates, because the constant stream of thought is about all this social shit of I'm not good enough, I'm gonna get judged or criticized, and it's all coming from the past. And then when you come back in the present moment and you look at people and you start to connect with that oneness and love, then a new story arises. It's not a story, you can see clearly. And so what I'm saying here is that with this new sort of perception, that whole thought, that whole story and the thoughts going on about people are going to criticize me, when you're stuck in your head, I'm not good enough and all this shit, all that becomes irrelevant. All that becomes not true, false. You know what I mean? Because we're always thinking based on the past. We're trapped in the past from our previous conditioning. So I'm thinking oh no, I've got this whole story in my head, I can't do this because people will judge me, I want to do that, but I can't do that, I feel unworthy. And then you come back in the present moment and look at people and go, oh no, like people aren't, like, yeah, maybe people will criticize me, but they're the same as me. It's love, it's oneness. And then you go back to those thoughts of like unworthiness, oh, people are going to judge me, that you were in before, and it's like, oh, that doesn't add up anymore. Because how I see people can't affect me. You know, they may judge me and criticize me, but in my own perception, they're just like me, worthy of love. So anyway, just wanted to film that video. Thanks for watching. I think I've exhausted what I wanted to say here, pretty much. So yeah.